Welcome back to another great episode of the Adam Talks podcast.
I started out as a wrestler, 10 years Olympic style. So I started when I was about 9 or so.
We said we don't want Bruce Wayne to be old and that's his reason for retiring. He has to have a reason to not be doing this.
I knew I'd always wanted to do it. I never saw myself at a desk job, and anytime I thought of something else, it always brought me back to wrestling.
Man, I don't like fancy pad work. I like realistic pad work. Am I formed? Am I punching correctly? Am I balanced? Like a lot of them guys will hold pads way outside their faces, and it's just, I don't believe in that type of training, man. Like,
for a couple promotions, I wrestled under a mask, and we don't talk about those days. Because those days were fun and really embarrassing.
It is the first annual Berryville Film Festival. I'm the founder and festival director for it. So it's exciting to bring something to a small town, something brand new.
I think anything you do in wrestling has to have meaning to it. No matter, like, facial expressions, the high-flying moves, all that stuff like that.
We're back again with another great episode and another awesome guest. We have the creator, the owner, the distributor, Mr.Fish from Mr.Fish Comics. How's it going, man?
Oh, man, how is it going, dude? I'm happy to be here, man.
Dude, I am super happy. We met at Fort Smith Comic Con at my last wrestling match. I was strolling around and I see him. I was like, what the heck? This is pretty cool, man. I'm going to have to check this out. So before we get into your stuff, man, how did you get into comic books? Have you just always been into them?
Oh, man, I grew up with comic books around the house all the time. Like, my brother and sister were a lot older than me, so there were just always comic books around before I even knew how to read. So I was always looking through them, and like, I fell in love with the Hulk and Spider-Man. And I was also growing up at the time that, like, the Hulk came out on TV when I was a kid, and Wonder Woman was on TV, and they did those Spider-Man TV movies, and like the Spider-Man with the wire mesh goggles and the gloves and the big metal like web shooter on the outside, that will forever be my favorite Spider-Man, because that's the one that spurred my imagination as a kid. Like, I grew up watching Spider-Man on the Electric Company as a kid. So, like,
Oh, wow.
they were just always there. I grew up with Spidey and his amazing friends and the Super Friends and all that stuff. And, like, I was doomed when the first episode of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy came on. Because in the very first episode, they had to rescue a comic book artist who was being haunted by his superhero who had turned villain and, was ruining the day, and they had to figure out who was under the mask. And that's when I found out you could draw comic books and make a living, and I was done. My life was over from that point on, and that was what I had to do.
Man, I've always loved art. I've loved drawing and stuff, but I've never had the handle on how to do hands and feet and all that stuff. I guess it's kind of like a Liefeld thing. I can't really get my feet right. You know what I mean? And it's also a Liefeld thing with the proportions for me. My proportions are just always off the wall. How do you make things so close to reality as far as the form and the shape and the size proportions and stuff?
That was something that I had to work really hard on, because I learned to draw from like cartoons and comic books, which are disproportionate. Like, they start out disproportionate, and especially like coming of age, like I graduated in 93. So like when Image is exploding, like that was the peak of like this is amazing, but everything was distorted and crazy out of whack, and that's how I learned to draw. So my shoulders were giant and massive, and the heads were tiny, and the fists were like twice the size of the heads, and the feet and ankles were super tiny, and like I drew in these crazy weird proportions, and at some point I realized like there were a whole lot of guys I knew my age that were a great Jim Lee clone or a great Todd McFarlane clone. Like, I was trying to be a mix of 3 or 4 different dudes, and I was like, there's a whole lot of people that clone these guys better than me. They're either going to hire the original artist or one of these better clones, but they're not going to hire me for the job, because I can't compete with that in their style. So I decided to go back and figure out how to draw from scratch again. And I went all the way back to the beginning, and I started drawing from life. And I was like, look at people, look at things, look at objects, like look at the gas station I was working in and think, how would I translate this onto a white sheet of paper with nothing but white paper and black lines? And, how would I make this look like that? And what I ended up with, as you could probably attest, is a style that's a lot more old school than a lot of people my age. Because a lot of people my age fill the page with cross hatching and stuff because that's what you do. But like people don't have cross hatching on their face, and that was something I ran into all the time until I'd re-taught myself how to draw. When I did anything for anybody outside of comic books, they would be like, "Why are all those lines on their face? Like people don't have all that on them." And they didn't understand the shorthands that we're so used to in comic books. So I had to go back and teach myself how to redraw, and I came up with a style that is a lot more reminiscent of like Steve Ditko or Jack Kirby than of like Jim Lee or Todd McFarlane. And but in that, I also taught myself to draw from life again, and I still challenge myself as much as I can to draw from life or draw from TV. And like if I'm bored or we're on vacation or something, and I don't have like I'm not working on a job, which is pretty rare, but like if I have time to just draw for fun, I'll be sketching while we're watching the news or watching, fire and rescue shows or whatever, and I'll be drawing the people on the show. I'll be drawing the news anchors and whatnot. And it got me real good at drawing regular people in regular clothes in regular proportions because a whole lot of comic book artists can't do that. Like Rob Liefeld still can't do that. Like he tries to draw a guy in a suit and it's like you're drawing a pro wrestler with seams all over them. Like it's just you can see every muscle flexing, and that's not what a guy in a suit. That's not what The Rock looks like in a suit. And
No.
so like and sometimes I still have to go to references. Like I was recently just working on a commission for one of my Patreon backers. He's one of like the top tier backers that pays to get a commission every month. And one of his characters is like a really bowed up dude. Like he's a big old He-Man guy. And he wanted them all dressed in fancy suits, and I was like, well, crap, I know how to draw regular people in suits. I did not know how to draw somebody that buff. So I literally was like looking up like The Rock in suits and stuff like that to try and get, because I know he likes to dress nice, trying to find like what does that size body look like in a suit and how does it lay? And that gave me the stuff I needed to know to do that. But yeah, I still look at reference, not every day, not every picture, but I definitely look at reference a lot, like to get inspiration, to get ideas for like clothing and stuff, because if it was left up to me, everybody'd be wearing t-shirt and jeans. And like, you got to mix it up and have stuff look different and have stuff look more stylish sometimes.
Simple is not always the best in comic books.
Sometimes it's great. Sometimes like you different people have different characters and need to wear different kind of stuff, and having one character that's in a slouchy hoodie and the other person in evening dress tells you a lot about who they are.
Yeah. Is story writing a difficult thing for you?
Coming up with stories is not hard. I come up with new ideas every day. Picking what I'm going to work on and staying focused and not getting distracted is the hard part. Coming up with stories, telling stories, like being creative, telling what happened on the way to the grocery store in an interesting, compelling way to make a funny story out of it, easy. Sitting down to write a script for a comic book, one of the hardest damn things in the world for my little ADD brain. Like, the anxiety builds up so much. And I know I can do it. I've done it dozens of times. But still, something in my brain is like, oh man, that's the hard part. You're going to have to put all the words down on paper, and you're going to have to put them all in order, and you're going to have to change some of them. And like my anxiety gets ahead of me. So I've tricked my brain, and I don't write anymore. I make outlines. And then I just flesh out my outlines. Like I will put down like the 4 or 5 beats that I know I need to hit in this comic book. And I might move them around a little bit as I think about it. And sometimes I'll even like get on a video call with a friend of mine, like with my editor, and we'll talk out ideas and stuff. And like I know where I'm headed, and I know what waypoints I need to hit along the way. but maybe if we go around the barnyard and hit this one first and then hit that one second, it makes a more interesting trip. And so we talk it out a little bit. I put those in order, and I'm like, okay, well, to get from here to there, I need these 3 points. And then to get between those, I need a couple of points. And then next thing you know, I've pretty much written the whole thing out, but I've tricked myself. Instead of writing, I'm just making an outline. Outline's easy. I can just jot down a
Yeah.
couple notes real quick. And like with one of my series, The Mighty Caw, this big bird barbarian, um, the idea hit me so hard one day, and I was working on a client's book and I had so many ideas come into my head. I was like, okay, I'm just going to jot down a couple notes real quick and get them out of my head so I don't forget them because they're cool. And so I sat down, I opened a Google Doc, I started making some points, and like 3 or 4 hours later, I had the first 36 issues laid out. Like
Oh
just
wow.
and a lot of it was like long form writing. Like once I got started going, I was just going, and it just poured out of me in a big jumbled mess. But like it's got the roadmap for a good 10 years of stuff in there. And once I get started, it's easy. It's the getting started that's real intimidating. That aspect, just the mental hurdle of I have to write a script, is the hardest part for me. And I know it's not hard. It just seems so scary before I started.
I think the anxiety probably comes from like knowing that you have to make it sound like a real conversation in whatever's happening if the people are talking with dialogue, or if it's not dialogue and it's describing a scene, it has to be descriptive enough that the people can, relate to it and
Mm-hmm.
feel it, not just see it in the pictures.
And
But
I want you to care about the characters too. Like, I don't want it to just be some random talking head. Like, I want you to get a feel for who they are and like the different kinds of characters and stuff that they are. And I'm thinking about their body language and like the way they speak and the pace they speak at and stuff. Like in Green Zone, there's for those that don't know, my story Green Zone takes place in a world where it's illegal to be born a mutant. So we're following a bunch of mutant cops on their first shift trying to earn their citizenship. If they can make it 5 years, they can get their green cards and move out of the ghetto, make a better life for themselves. And so like one character, Virgil, is an 8 foot tall lizard monster dude. He almost never gets the opportunity to speak. So when he does, his voice is super rough and gravelly, and nobody ever talks to him, so he's not used to talking, so he doesn't do much. And so a lot more of it is body language and stuff with him. His training officer, Danny Kim, is like, "Hey, how you doing? Nice to see you." He's a very like kind of car salesman kind of guy, and so I like to get that. I bet you're with the ladies, aren't you? Yeah, I tell you, me too. Man. Like he's just that kind of guy, and so I like getting that with his body language and the way he's just constantly running his mouth faster than he can think. And then Bellamy is another character who's based on our daughter, who's like this 5 foot tall, 90 pound, skinny little girl covered in razor sharp quills. And you can just see how uncomfortable she is in her body all the time. And she's constantly like got her elbows tucked in and she's constantly looking over her shoulder because if she bumped into you and sticks you with her quills, she could go to prison. So, like, she's constantly on edge and constantly afraid of hurting somebody. And so you see that in her body language and see her when she's like little things like when they're calling out her name, she's not paying attention because she's too busy looking around over her shoulder that like she misses the fact that they're calling her name. And little things like that make you care about the characters. Like, yeah, that's the stuff. You got to pick which ones am I going to put in, which ones am I going to leave out. Which there's all kinds of cool stuff I wanted to put in issue one that I had to cut out that I couldn't fit in there. It killed me.
Jesus, man. I I don't know how you would do something like you're doing. Is it been like a dream or a thought that you've had for a long time to make your own comic books, or have you been like maybe one day I'll
Oh
be a
man.
comic book artist for someone else and get big that way, or
As a kid, I as a little kid, I would have been perfectly happy, like, drawing on Spider-Man or Batman or, the Hulk or Iron Man or whatever, I would have been happy just to get in the door as I was a little kid. By the time I was probably 10, I realized that I was different than everybody else, and I had a lot more ideas, and stories just came to me naturally. And I was like, even with the properties that I dearly love, that inspired my imagination, like if I got to the opportunity to work on Star Wars or He-Man or Thundercats or something, yeah, I'd want to work on that because I love those properties. But I would much rather make my own. Like that's really what I wanted to do, and that really skewed everything from there on. And then not long after that, like in the 80s, the Ninja Turtles hit big, and like I found them in the comic book store before they became a cartoon, in that small window before they became a cartoon, and fell in love with this black and white comic that was like super violent, super weird, and I loved indie comics because that's where all the weird stuff happened. I taught myself my entire life. I studied black and white art. I studied grayscale. I studied zipatone and all of this stuff that nobody uses anymore because I wanted to work in indie comics, and all indie comics were black and white back in the day. Now that I can make a living in indie comics, they're all freaking color. So I had to teach myself color theory and teach myself how to color. I spent like half of my life studying black and white. I have no need for that foolish color. And now everything I do is in color. It blows my mind that anybody pays me to color a book. Like, I'm a one-stop shop. Like if you want a comic book made, you hire me, you give me a script or sometimes just a rough outline, and I give you a finished book. Usually I do the pencils, the colors, the lettering, the inking, the whole 9 yards. And I give you a finished book ready to go to print. And it works out really great. But it's still in the back of my mind. I'm like, I'm not really a colorist. Like I can't believe people pay me for that. Eventually, somebody's going to realize I'm faking it, and they're going to take the money back. And like the last 4 jobs I just got paid for were strictly color jobs. Like they didn't even have me doing the artwork. They're just like they needed a colorist, and they hired me. That's freaking insane. Because in my mind, I'm still faking it. I'm still figuring it out as I go. But I've been figuring it out as I go for quite a while now, and I've gotten a little bit good at it.
How long has Mr. Fish Comics actually been around, man?
That is the crazy thing. I self-published my first book, T-Man and Hyperstrike, comic book about a superhero team with Tourette syndrome and ADHD, because that's what I grew up with as a kid, and I wanted to inspire all the little tickers out there like me to focus on the things that make us awesome, like my creativity and my imagination, and not focus so much on the ticks and the way people might poke fun and laugh at us, and focus on what makes us awesome before the world beats you down. And it sold really great. It was to a market where nobody ever makes anything for them. So it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, and did really well. I published that. It came out in like February 2019. And since then, I have just completed work today on my 90th book since then. Now, like, not
Wow.
all of those are me doing everything. Like this number 90 was just lettering. And so that went quickly. And a couple of those have just been coloring, and one of them was just pencils. But yeah, that's 90 books now in almost 6 years. In February it'll be
Holy
6 years.
cow, man. Wow. How many
I flat
characters
put
are
out
in
some
this
more.
universe?
In mine, oh man, like I couldn't even put a number on it. Like, and the thing that I'll tell you that I don't tell most people, and for the people listening to this, you got a little insight into Mr. Fish Comics that people don't know yet. There's some hints, but not many people know it yet. The world of Green Zone, and where it's these mutant cops and everything in a world that hates them, and the far-flung sci-fi fantasy of the bird barbarian, the mighty Caw from across the galaxy. Those stories are actually taking place on the same planet, like millions of years apart from each other. And there
Whoa.
are there are little hints sprinkled in every once in a while, and like the king that rules his planet now is going to be a supervillain that shows up in Green Zone, and he's just still alive, and finally managed to take over the world because humanity basically killed themselves, and so he was pretty much all that was left. And so there's little hints that sprinkle in and out between them, and like if you buy the source books and stuff, it gives you all the behind the scenes and like tells you how he went from being a supervillain to running for president to being, the emperor of the planet now, and all this stuff. But so like I like tying things together. I like having weird links between things. The story that I just got launched on BackerKit, it was just successful like at the beginning of the month, finished as part of Comictopia, is Alice Lost in Wonderland. That's a story I have literally been working on for 30 years.
Holy
And
cow.
I just shipped off the order. This morning I signed off on the proof, and it's getting offset printed, and they're going to send me 500 copies of it, and it's going to go up live. And it's going to be one of the books that I really focus on hard for the next couple of years, because it's a story I love the most, that I've worked the hardest on. And it started out about a time traveling barbarian with a sword that could just cut through reality, and he could go wherever he wanted to go. And it was kind of a power fantasy as a kid. Like, what would I do if I could go anywhere at any time and I didn't have to worry about the consequences and nobody could tell me what to do? I probably wouldn't be a very good guy, but like, what kind of adventures might I get up to in the multiverse and throughout time if I could do whatever I wanted? And over the years that I've had for this story to marinate, like, I have become a father. I became disabled. I've become a grandfather. I've seen people born and die, and I've gained so much and I've lost so much. And the story has become much deeper and richer over the time. And now it's really more about the different people we are at different phases of our lives. Like who we are when we're a child and when we're a brash teenager and we think we know it all, and who we are when the world kicks us in the teeth and shows us we didn't know anything, and who we are as a wise elder, who we are when we're a hero to one person and a monster to somebody else, and how you could try your best and still end up having your kids hate you, and all this stuff. The complicated relationship with my dad, being an adoptive parent myself, like seeing some of my friends that became parents way too early, and the crap that went wrong for them because they were kids trying to be all buddy buddy with a kid that they were supposed to be parenting. And so, and then I was talking with a friend one day, and he was like, "Where do you get all these ideas for stories?" And I was just kicking out ideas. You could take fairy tales and twist them around. And I was like, you could, like, for instance, you could take, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland, except like Alice is a wandering samurai, and Wonderland is like an interdimensional rift between planets. So all the weird creatures are like aliens from different worlds that have come through this rift, and now she's stuck in this weird realm with them. And I couldn't get that idea out of my head. And then I realized, like, if I put the two stories together, like, the barbarian had an adopted daughter. If I took her out and put Alice in her place, and I turn the story around the other way and I tell it from Alice's point of view, then suddenly the story gets a lot more interesting. You get to see the consequences a lot quicker of his failures and whatnot throughout his life. You get to put a sexy girl on the cover and, have her be the star of the show, which is always good for selling books. And you get the public domain name recognition of like, oh, I know who Alice is. And some people will just pick it up for that alone. Some people will pick it up for the undercleavage, like, whatever it, whatever gets you to buy the book. You'll get hooked on the story once you buy the book. And so I get to do all these cool things. I get to have this really weird, nearly feral version of Alice who's grown up without any real supervision. And she's dangerous, and she's beautiful, and she's kind of nasty, and like she will cut you just as quick as anything, but she'll also like use her looks to get close to a target so that she can capture him. And she's like makes her living as a bounty hunter now. And she's like that. I equate her to that really beautiful, like dread-headed chick at Coachella that, she's beautiful and sexy, but she's also greasy and stinks, and she might just cut you, and, she's exciting, but she's dangerous. Like, that's who she is. Like, I love her so much. Like, at one point, she's shaking like a dog just to get all this, like, rotten fruit off of her. I freaking love her so much, and she's been so much fun to do, and getting to work on this story that has been marinating and burning a hole in my heart for 30 years has been amazing. And the best part is I got to hire my son, who's now like 20. He grew up listening to these stories his whole life. I got to hire him as the colorist. He colored like half the pages in this book. You can't tell which pages I colored and which pages he did. And it was so cool to get to work with him, and it meant so much to him to get to be a part of getting to see these stories actually get published, that he knows I've been waiting forever. All 90 books that I've worked on for myself and other clients, all of that has been paving the way for Alice Lost in Wonderland. And now I can actually start doing it, and I'm super excited about that.
So in Green Zone, it seems like a lot of inspiration from X-Men. Like, because I noticed a lot of similarities in the way that there's like persecution in the way the X-Men are persecuted in their comics. I've been on a big X-Men kick here lately, so I noticed it in a very large way. Did you get inspiration from any other sources for your comics, or are they all super original as well?
I got a lot of inspiration for my story, especially Green Zone, but a lot of it honestly has come from like my life and like people that I grew up with, things that happened to me growing up. Like the story in the beginning of Green Zone where Virgil's like 5 years old and the cops beat him up and they get mad at
Yeah.
him because he keeps saying yes sir and no sir to them. Like that literally happened to me when I was 16. I nearly got shot by a cop because I was saying yes sir and no sir, and he just assumed that I was being disrespectful, and he started to unholster his gun on me. If the Wendy's hadn't gotten robbed right then, I probably would have got shot. And
What the
I knew
hell?
I was going to get arrested. It's a it's a it's a heck of a story, and I'll tell it if you want me to. But like I knew I was going to get arrested. There was no question I was getting arrested. So I just wanted to make this as smooth as possible. I wanted to walk in under my own power. Like I didn't want any broken arms or legs. I wanted this to be as smooth a transition into captivity as possible. So I'm, yes, sir. No, sir. Do you know why I pulled you over? Yes, sir, I do. I know why you pulled me over. We were doing 70 and a 35 in the middle of the night in the dark with no headlights, with somebody hanging out all four windows, surfing on the hood and the trunk and the roof of the car. I was driving out the window with a string tied to the steering wheel, and like I absolutely know why you pulled me over. Yes, I do. But this was Mississippi in 93 in the middle of the night, and I'm in a black trench coat with a mohawk, and there's a black police officer that probably hasn't gotten a lot of respect from white people that he's pulled over. And so he just assumed that I was smarting off to him, and I'm like, no, sir, which just made him madder and madder and madder until he was unholstering his gun. Like I said, if the Wendy's hadn't gotten robbed right then, I'm afraid I might have got myself shot.
Holy
And
cow.
that ended up in Green Zone. There's a lot of things that are going to be much bigger issues down the road that I'm starting to lay the groundwork for now that like come out of my life with Tourette syndrome. Like like Virgil looks like a big scary monster. I've always been bigger than everybody else. Everybody's always been intimidated by me because I'm a big giant guy. And I'm a nice guy. I really never wanted to get into a fight or anything, but everybody was terrified of me, and so it was like he is the embodiment of what it feels like to be like that. His training officer Danny Kim is just a little skinny Korean dude. He's a genome too. He has to wear a green stripe on his outfit so that you know that he's a genome and everything, but he just looks like a human. If he wasn't
What
marked
is
with that
going
green
on?
stripe, you wouldn't know. And so
Ah,
he's had a very easy life. His dad is the commanding officer, so he can't get fired no matter what he does. He doesn't take anything seriously. He's had a much easier life than everybody else. And he's he's Virgil's training officer. He doesn't even realize that he's had it that much easier than Virgil. Like, he's like, oh, I got you, blood. We're genomes. We'll stick together. He doesn't even realize how tone deaf he is because he doesn't know what it's been like to grow up for Virgil. And there's this whole animosity that I'm trying to lay the groundwork for between the genomes that look really scary and the genomes that don't. And that absolutely comes from my experience in the Tourette's world, because some of us with more severe Tourette's there's been a lot of animosity between them with mild Tourette's, and the people with mild Tourette's get mad at the people with severe Tourette's, saying it's your fault, people make fun of us, and the people with severe Tourette's get mad at the mild ones, saying you're complaining about blinking a lot when I've been stuck in a wheelchair for 15 years. And so it comes directly from that, and lots of other stories from my life. But the thing that's really been meaningful to me is to hear other people come up to me and tell me how much it feels like I'm telling a story from their life, and what it feels like, between being the haves and the have-nots, or what it's like to be black, or what it's like to have some of the fighting between light skin and dark skin and things like that. And that's amazing to me that anybody else can see their experience in what's going on here is beautiful to me. And I'm hoping at the end with Green Zone that anybody will be able to look at it and read this story and be able to understand some people just have a harder time. And not everybody starts from the same point. They don't all start from the same starting line. And Virgil just had a tough go of it, and life was hard for Virgil, and it doesn't get easier, and sometimes like bad things just keep happening. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily a bad person. It doesn't mean that you didn't work 3 times as hard as everybody else just to still have everything blow up on you. Sometimes things go bad. Sometimes things just aren't your fault. Sometimes things just don't break your way. And if you can read the story, and if you can feel bad for Virgil and realize, he's had a tough go with things, and things never really went his way, and I wish somebody would have just given him a break, maybe that can give you the compassion to look at other people in your life around you and say, hey, you know what? Maybe they're not in that position because they're lazy or stupid or whatever I assumed. Maybe it's been a little harder. Maybe they didn't start out from the same place. Maybe they've been scrambling hard trying to climb out of the hole they're in, and the walls keep caving in. And if you could read it and feel compassion for Virgil, then I'm hoping it'll help people read it and have some compassion for the other people in their lives. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'm dreaming. But that's my hope anyway. But yeah, it comes from a whole lot of things in my life, a lot of my experiences, a lot of the things I've seen my family go through, my friends go through, their families go through. Some people that just keep making the same mistakes over and over again, some people that never learn, some people that just always get lucky and seem to have it easy. All kinds of different stories have all gotten melded together into one story.
Man, it sounds like a beautiful dream, man. It's a great dream. I said it once and then you stopped talking for a second, and I said it again. So, but yeah, man, it's a great dream. I write. Me and my friends were trying to come up with this superhero film universe we were gonna do. Just short films, little resource films where we use what we have around us to do whatever. If we have a cool mask, it's going in there. If we have a cool idea for a character, that's what we're going to do, whatever. But basically, I've tried to relate some of the stuff in my life to these characters, like, having to persevere, overcome a lot of things, not necessarily personal things to me, but like just anything in life whenever you're trying to do something, you got to overcome, you got to keep going in order to do something. You can't stop just because it gets hard, essentially. And I feel like a lot of comics do the same thing. And the way it sounds, yours is going to be something that does something very similar to that as well. It's overcoming, it's working through, it's being able to say, hey, we're fine, we're all right there. Even if you're different, it doesn't matter. You're okay. Everything's going to be all right,
Hmm.
Coexisting as well is a big thing.
Yeah. And and that's one of the things that I want to show just because somebody grew up different, just because they had more than you or less than you doesn't mean that they're not just as worthy or just as cool. And like sometimes it takes some getting over. Like one thing that happens throughout the first 3 issues of Green Zone is, at one point, uh, Danny ends up buying Virgil lunch, and Virgil hasn't eaten in days. And nobody has ever just bought him food before. Nobody's ever just been like, "Yeah, man, get what you want. Sure, no problem. You can get it next time." And that leaves him completely suspicious afterwards. And then when everything goes really bad at the end of issue 2, Virgil keeps going back and forth into this burning building looking for Danny, because risking his life over and over again, because he can't let Danny die in here because Danny did this thing for him. And if nothing else, Virgil's going to risk his life just to get Danny out to find out why. Like, why did you do this? Because it doesn't make sense. People don't give you something for no reason. And which seems kind of foreign, like to me, like growing up in my household, if you came over, like my mom's going to feed you. But I have been around other families, and other families that I've spent a lot of time around where that's not the case. Like they grew up where like ain't nobody giving you nothing, and if they do, you better be leery because there's some ulterior motive to it. And so I'm putting all of those different experiences and stuff in, and and showing that me coming from the life I came from and the guys that came from that life have been some of the closest, tightest brothers that you could ever ask for in my entire life. And, just because we grew up very differently doesn't mean that we can't be awesome brothers and take care of each other and lift each other up. And, that's the kind of stuff that I want to share. I want to inspire people. I want to inspire people to do better. I want to take you on an emotional journey. I want to make you laugh because my characters are happy. I want to make you cry because they're sad. But, ultimately, I want to uplift you and, inspire you to want to be better and do better, I guess.
Wait, yeah, the comic books in general, man, are like an escape for a lot of people. If you're in a bad reality or bad situation in real life, you want to find an escape of some sort. In your comic books, I haven't gotten too deep into them, obviously, yet, but I'm working my way towards it, obviously. Anyway, uh, it sounds like yours, that would help them to, if they're in that bad situation, to see, hey, there are people out there that are able to, be there for you. You have people around you and stuff. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm in I go to therapy, and I've gone to therapy for about 4 years. And the thing that I've learned is people go through a lot of bad situations, and whenever you go through a bad situation, you got to find a way to dig yourself out, and you got to find a way to overcome this thing. And like I said earlier, it sounds like it helps to helps. My words aren't working. The ADHD parts of my brain are taking over. Uh, I lost it. The the
Not for nothing. I am a big fan of therapy. I have been going for years and still go, just because I like having somebody to talk to that isn't involved in the situation, that can help keep me honest and give me a clear outside perspective on things, and help point out if I'm not being honest with myself, or if I'm being too hard on myself, or if I'm putting unrealistic expectations on myself that I wouldn't put on somebody else. That's the kind of stuff that I'm working on now. But there's always something that I could get better at, and I want to do that. And to your earlier point, like it might stink where we're at right now, but usually if we're willing to put in the work and not quit, not give up, it will get better. It might not get better as quickly as we want. We might not strike it rich and get internet famous and make $1 million tomorrow. But if we keep grinding away, it's going to get better and better and better. Like, I remember an interview with Jay Leno towards the end of his career, and they were asking, like, when did you know you were going to make it? When did you know that this was going to be successful? And he was talking about, it was like a Tuesday or a Thursday or something, and it was late at night. He was eating dinner at his desk at his office, and the TV was on, and there was like a Laker game on or something, and he saw one of the other late night hosts, on the front row, you know, on the court at the Laker game, you know, and that was when he realized, like, they're out having fun while I'm still sitting here working. I am always going to work harder than everybody else does. I'm going to succeed for that reason alone. And that stuck in my brain at the time. And because I was already a hard worker, and it's given me that perseverance to just keep my nose to the grindstone and keep putting out books after book after book, and knowing, like, even if the last Caw Kickstarter didn't do as great as I might would have liked it to do, that still got two more issues of that book printed that will now forever be in my library, that I will forever have to sell. And that is just building my library bigger and bigger and bigger. So when I go to shows, I have that many more books to sell that I can put in that much bigger of a bundle and make that much more of a deal on and make that much more money on. And I will never be able to quit selling these books because there will always be new people that haven't read them. And it's not like there's a time limit on them. They're only good for this month and then they're gone. I will keep selling these books forever, and at least as long as I'm here. And so I'm investing in my future, and nobody's going to work harder at investing in my future than I am. And it steadily is getting bigger and bigger and better, and the Kickstarter's doing a little bit better each time, and we're getting a few more backers each time, and it's growing. And every time I go do a show, I make a few more fans and a few more friends and a few more connections. And like, every show I go to now, I usually get somebody that subscribes to my Patreon, where you could sign up for either $5 or $10, and at $5 you get a free digital comic every month, a new digital comic. $10, you get a physical book shipped to your door every month. That's a better subscription deal than you're going to get at Marvel. And, you know, and it sounded crazy
Definitely.
when I started. Everybody thought there's no way you can keep up with a book a month. But we are now on the 14th month, and I'm going to ship out the 15th book in 14 months at the end of this month. And I've been doing it for over a year now, and it's been successful. Now, a couple of times I've been real lucky that I got a stack of comp copies in from a client on a book that I had just finished, and I was like, okay, great, that can be next month's book that goes out. There's a couple of times that really helped me, so I could work on another client book and make some money to pay the rent before I did another one of my books that might not quite cover the mortgage. And but they're getting better and bigger, and it's just growing. And as long as I keep putting the work in, it's going to keep growing. The soil might be rocky. Comic books might have been a tough road to hoe. I might could have picked something easier to do, but this is where my passion is. This is what brings me the most joy. This gets to use all the parts of my creativity and my ingenuity and my heart and my storytelling and my passion. All of that gets to go into this. I could make per hour what I make per day if I went back to doing logo design. But I don't like doing logo design, and it's not fun. And I'm always working with somebody who's never hired an artist before, and they don't know what they're doing, and they're nervous, and they constantly want to change things. And it's very frustrating. But when I'm working in comics, I'm always happy. I might be working 16 hours a day, but I'm always happy. My clients are always ecstatic. I'm always excited with my work. I'm always looking forward to get up tomorrow and get back to work because I love what I freaking do. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. I'd like to get a little more money at it. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but if you want to sign up for my Patreon for $10 and get free comic books to you, you can do that. Help a fishy out.
I mean, the saying is true. You find a job you love, man, you'll never work a day in your life. It's
I
very
work my
true.
butt off, but I love it. I love it. I'm not miserable. Like, I have worked jobs where I made so much money I could not shut my freaking wallet. But I was working so many hours at this factory, getting so much overtime and so much double time. We had to work every day. We had to work 12 hours. We usually had to work 8 to 12 hours on Saturday. Most of the time we had to go in on Sunday, and like I only had a lunch break one day that I could go cash my check, and then I had to get right back to work. And I never got to spend any of the money I had, and I sat there crying in the parking lot every morning before going in because I freaking hated my job with all the being in my I couldn't stand it. I just hated it. It it was mind-numbing and boring, and with my imagination that drives me insane. Like if I don't have something to keep my mind occupied, it just starts running, and I can't do that. I need something to think
Yeah.
about. And God, I love my job, man. I love it. Absolutely love it. Couldn't be happier.
If there is a stressful part of your job, man, would it happen to be something, is it deadlines? Is it something else? Is it making sure you get exactly what the client asks for whenever you're making their comic? Or what is the most stressful part about this for you?
Getting the clients what they want has gotten easier because I've started to get more selective about the clients that I take on. And now that I'm doing a whole lot more of my own work, I'm needing a lot less client work. Like last year, I made it 7 months out of the year off of just my own work. This year, it's probably going to be like 9 months of the year going to be just my stuff. So I'm taking on less stuff, so I get to be more selective and working with people that have the same kind of imagination and their creative trains running on the same tracks. That makes all the difference because if your imagination's going that way and mine goes this way, it's going to be pulling teeth the whole time. I'm going to do what I think looks cool and you don't like it and you want me to change it and make it lame, and I can't wrap my brain around why you think this is cool. Like if I could understand why you think it's cool, then I can at least know where to aim. But when I don't know why you think that's cool, that's hard. That's so being selective has helped with that part. Um, Honestly, and deadlines aren't that big of a deal because I work really fast, and I my artwork is simple. Uh, I work really quickly. If it's a book that I know well, I can usually pencil a lot of those books in like 2 or 3 days. Like I'm working on a book for a new client, doing new characters that I've never drawn before, and it's all MMA and stadiums full of thousands of fans. And this is taking, I'm getting like 2 or 3 pages drawn a day. Usually I would have had the book penciled by now already and be going through the inks. But, you know, each book's different. Deadlines usually aren't a problem. The really, really stressful part for me is everything else that you have to do being a small business owner and being as like I'm a one man shop. So like having to do all the social media stuff, having to film all the social media stuff, having to film posts for TikTok and take pictures for Facebook and Instagram and stuff. So there's stuff to feed the machine so that people will see it, so people will come check out my books. And like that takes so much time scheduling Kickstarters, setting up Kickstarters, ordering everything, fulfilling the book, like all the time it takes to plan a crowdfunding campaign and then like do the surveys, get everything ordered, and then get it all shipped and packed out and sent to everybody. Like that time, I could produce a whole nother book in the time it takes me to do that. And most of the time, either like when that campaign's running, I could either spend all day pimping out that campaign and going on podcasts like, hey, go Mr.Fish.com, check out the check out the new Kickstarter and go back it now and you can get in. I could be making posts and going on podcasts all day long and not be able to work and make that Kickstarter go an extra $1,000 higher, or I can relax and get a little bit of work done and make less money at it, but still I can't work full time during that time because I still have to be going out and advertising it. All the extra business stuff is really stressful. That takes a lot out. If I could just sit here and draw comic books, I could almost knock out two a month if that's all I had to do. But I can't do that. I have to do all the other stuff too. I have actually taken to hiring on some people to help me out. Like some of them I'm just flat paying. Some of them I'm paying cash and work. Like the book I just lettered, I'm lettering for my editor so that he will help me up by setting up my Kickstarter and stuff for me so that he can take some of that off of my plate so that I can get more work done. And I hired some people to post to my social media for me so I can take a day and film videos and stuff, and I can record time lapses while I'm drawing and give that to them, and they can schedule it to post. Because just going online to post stuff, that takes an hour or two out of my day each time because I have to wait for it to upload, and then I get lost in TikTok for a few minutes. Then I have to go over to Facebook and upload it, and then I get lost scrolling Facebook for a few minutes, and then I have to go to Instagram, rinse, lather, repeat. Everyone I go to, I get lost. Don't even get me started putting it on YouTube because I'm gonna get lost in YouTube, and you know, so I end up losing 2 hours every time I have to post. That's a page or two I could have penciled in that time. Like, I I got work to do. So if I can pay you a little bit of money to do that for me, and I can just give you all the pictures and let you post them, okay, I'm going to do that. And so I'm trying to be smart about it. And like even the cons that I go to now, I'm starting to be more careful and think about and stuff because like going to a con, usually I make money at a con most of the time. If it's a good show and there's enough people there, usually I make plenty of money for the con, the table, and usually get the hotel and everything paid for and make a little money in my back pocket at the end of it usually. And then I'm bringing in new fans and stuff too, which is valuable. But some of these shows, like by the time I drive there, that's losing a day ahead of time. Drive home, that's losing a day. Getting everything packed up the day before is losing a day. Recovering and getting everything unpacked and put back away is losing another day. Well, now that's a whole week for that weekend con. And like making enough money to pay for that weekend is one thing. Making enough money to pay for a week of being out of work, that's another thing. So
Yeah.
like I'm starting to be more careful now about like, am I going to make enough money for the amount of time that this show is going to take me? And I'm a disabled artist too. So like, you know, I I can't just get up and walk any old time I want to. Like I look really good on camera right now because I'm focused and we're having a great conversation and my mind is occupied. Once this is over, I'm going to be a ticky mess and I'm not going to be able to see. But luckily this is my house and I know how to get from here to my recliner. So I don't have to be able to see to do that. But I'm going to be a twitchy mess when this is over. And so like, you know, I have to take that stuff into consideration too.
Definitely, man. Definitely. You made a new fan out of me for sure, man. I loved looking at the comics while I was up there at Fort Smith Comic Con. I love checking them out. Like I told you there, man, if I would have had money, I would have bought one from you, but just didn't have money. You know, that's how it works. You got to have gas money to get back home. So,
I feel you. Man, there were so many cool books there that I wanted to pick up. And but I got a rule about I got to make money before I spend money. And yeah, Fort Smith was a tight one. It was a fun show, and
Mhm.
met a lot of awesome people, and made new connections, and got new subscribers to the Patreon, and got some people that went over and backed the Backer Kit campaign, and they're going to get the copies of Alice when it comes out and stuff. It was lots of great people, but came up a little bit shy on the money. Would have been nice to have a little bit more money.
Man, your art style is very unique. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning because, you know, you're like you said, you're not a Liefeld, you're not a Jim Lee, you're not a Todd McFarlane, you're your own unique style. And I do think it does harken back to the Ditko style of art. You know, it's very, I don't know the word to describe it. It's very Mr. Fish. How about that?
That it is.
I mean, I think it's awesome, man. I think the way it is, I think the way you've done your art and the way you, like just flipping through the digital copy of the Green Zone, man, it's very vivid. You can feel the art. You know what I mean? How are you able to put that feel into the art? I mean, whenever you're drawing something, how do you get the feeling in it? Is it just the body language like you were talking about earlier? Is it more than that? Is it the color tones and everything all together?
A lot of it is the body language. Like that's a big one for me. And that's something that I get complimented on a lot is the body language and the emotion that I capture. Like years ago when web comics were new and nobody really knew what they were doing, I stumbled across a web comic that I wish I could find again. I don't even remember what the name of it was. It was like traditional comic book sized. It wasn't like most of them at the time were widescreen for, the desktop computers. But this was regular comic book size, and it was about like these spirit warriors. Like when you died, you went to the afterlife, and if you had some unfinished business, then you might be lingering around, and like whatever your spirit was attached to, like one guy used a hammer that he just happened to be holding when he died as his weapon and stuff like it, and they had white hair. I wish I could find it. I keep saying it on every podcast I go on, so somebody will someday message me and be like, "Oh, that's this one here," because I want to find it. But there was a scene in there. They drew very realistically, like they drew really great faces, very consistent, like looked like real people. And there was this one set of panels, these little vertical panels in the middle of the page. It was just like three panels, boom, 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 of this lady's face, and it was like the same head, each some very little change from panel to panel, and you just saw her heart break from one panel to the next. Like she realized this guy was never going to love her, and that was never going to change for all eternity. And you just watched her heart break in those panels, and I wept. It was so moving. It brought a tear to my eye, and I realized I couldn't do that. I did not have the skill set to do that. And so that became my challenge in life. Like I wanted to make you weep because my character was weeping. And so I started really working on emotion. And that also meant that I had to really start working on really nailing down my consistency, because it gets to the point where it's easy to draw a superhero head, or it's easy to draw like, a generic average guy head. Um, but drawing it to look like the same average guy over and over from 100 different angles, that's a whole different animal. I have made my living off of my art since junior high, drawing people's D&D characters on the bus. Like I have always made a living as an artist my entire life. I'm nearly 50 years old, and my artwork just exploded exponentially almost 6 years ago when I started doing comics full time, because there is nothing like cranking out page after page, panel after panel after panel, face after face, hand after hand after hand after hand after hand. Like, if you're worried about hands going in, you ain't going to be after a year or two. Like, I mean, you're going to draw a billion of them, so you better get comfortable with it. And, like, it just exploded. I got so much better, so much quicker, and I also started to realize like things that I spent a lot of effort in didn't necessarily matter as much. Like if I take a knuckle out of the finger and just put one bend in the middle, you can still read that's a finger, and that saves me 10 minutes. Okay, that's on a page, that's a lot of time. In a book, that's hours that it just saved me.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, like a finger might just bend right there. Fine, great. You can still read that it's a hand. You're not going through green zone like, wow, look at the lines on the back of those knuckles. Like nobody's doing that. So like nobody's like, did that finger have fingernails on it? Because I didn't see fingernails on that one. Had fingernails last time. Nobody's doing that. So like learning like where I can move faster, where I can be a little looser, what matters. Like, maybe his belt buckle doesn't matter quite as much as his face does in this panel. Know when to focus on these things helped speed me up, but also like the faster I got to go, the more emotional the drawing got to, the more energy got into it. It wasn't quite as stiff as it was when I was trying to be super, super accurate. And like, before I started drawing comic books every day, when I would draw, like, say, a cyborg with a, cybernetic arm, I loved drawing every single piston and nut and bolt and screw and wire. And like, I wanted you to look at this thing and you could see how all the plates of metal worked and how they laid over each other and how the pistons ran through it. You could tell how this thing worked. And you could try and build one if you wanted to. If you had the money, go ahead. I'm not doing that anymore because, like, I have to draw this freaking arm 600 times in this book alone. And I've got 10 more books to do after this. No! Like, I understand 100% why Colossus just has lines going across his muscles now. I thought it was a cop out in the beginning. It's a beautiful time saving device. Like, it gets the point across, it lets you know that his skin has changed, and it's not super complicated, but it lets you read it and understand it. And that's what I realized was most important. I read an excerpt from a book on inking that just changed my life. And it said, every extra line that you put into an image beyond making the image clear and telling the story is a waste of time. You know, I could fill it full of cross hatching, I could fill it full of background texture and stuff, but if it's not making the image more clear or making the story more obvious or releasing extra bits of information that you wouldn't have known otherwise, it's a waste of time. Now, if I want to waste a little time drawing Easter eggs into the picture frame in the background on the bookcase for people that are going to look hard enough to look at that, okay, that's giving extra information, that's giving a little backstory. I will do that, but I'm not just going to needlessly crosshatch the whole background just so, it looks like Jim Lee did it. That's pointless. Like
Yeah.
if it's not saying this is a bookcase, this is an end table, this is a lamp, this is the woman standing in front of it, and this is her crying, like, then I don't need those lines. And that really changed the game for me. And like I said, the faster I go, the more expressive I get, and it usually works out really well. Every once in a while, I draw a stinker and I have to erase it and start over. Every once in a while, I will just hit a pose that I'm like, I just don't know how to draw a new pose of, you know, a superhero jumping out of a window. I've done so many of them. Like, I don't want to look like I'm drawing the same thing again. But, like, I'll get stuck in my head every once in a while and have to draw the pose 3 times. But ultimately, that's like 30 minutes of time wasted. But, you know.
Yeah. Oh, man, I appreciate you coming on, man. It means a lot to me that you came on here today, dude.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely, man.
it's awesome learning about this stuff. I'm a big comic book fan, so like I told you, I've been a DC guy mostly, but here recently I've been getting into Marvel, and then over the past since I don't know off and on since 2012, I guess, I've been looking at some Valiant stuff and Image stuff as well. So that stuff all mixed up. It's really cool to learn about the process of what goes into to comic books and how character designs are thought up and you how you make a scene believable and compelling in a comic book,
Hmm.
because you can go through, you can look and you can see all this stuff and you get drawn in. But in my brain, my ADHD brain, it's like, oh, this is awesome. How did they do that? How did they make me feel what I feel? And now I've got a little bit more insight to that.
See,
So
that's what me and my kids do. Like when we go to a movie or we watch a TV show, and like, when you watch like a half hour, hospital drama and you're crying at the end because little Timmy died. I'm looking back, I'm like, how the hell did they make me cry about this kid that didn't exist 22 minutes ago? And, now I'm weeping that he's never going to get to go, to the state finals or whatever. Like, how did they do that? And so I'm like breaking down the story in my head, like, how did they get me there? And like you were saying about getting people to be in the place and look like they're a part of the environment, that is something that I recommend to everybody. It is much more important that you learn how to draw a realistic room in 3 point perspective and put a person in there standing on the ground that is at the right height with other things around it. That's much more important than drawing the most awesome muscle man pinup or the biggest boob chick pinup. Like, because so many people can do really awesome pinups, but can't make it work if they're not standing on rubble or in an explosion or something, because they don't know how to put their feet on the ground and make them actually look like they're a part of a scene. And,
Yeah.
getting people to be the same height relatively in comparison to each other is hard. Then put that in perspective is hard. Like, how tall is
Yeah.
this person when they're standing across the room? If this person's 6 foot tall and this person's 5 foot tall, that takes some work to do right. And like,
Yeah.
if you don't know how to do it, then it doesn't matter how cool you draw a bicep if you can't make it look like this person's actually standing at the cash register. And
Yeah.
so I push that stuff all the time. And my other big tip for anybody learning to draw is do the hard thing. Like, steer into the skid. If you don't want to draw it, start drawing it. Like, a lot of times when people are drawing their first comics, like, if Batman's in a warehouse, that warehouse will be like a bunch of squares for crates. And I'm like, okay, these squares work, but if you put that square in 3 point perspective, I know you don't want to do it because it's going to be harder, but if you do that and then you put some boards on the crate and you put one diagonal board to help hold those boards together, you know it might look a little wonky the first time. It always does, but you're going to get better and better at it. And like, instead of like having him stand at the railing with his back to you so you don't have to draw his face, and having the railing straight, put that railing in perspective and show his face from profile, and draw his damn hands holding onto the railing, even though you don't want to draw the hands because you had him in his pockets for a reason. I know you did. And, but like, do the thing you don't want to do because it's going to make you better. Like, you can always run from it and you'll never get any better at it. But if you just start doing it, you will get better at it. Like, nobody wants to go to the gym and work out. Nobody's like, what'd be great? If I couldn't get out of bed tomorrow without crying, that'd be awesome. Nobody
I can't
wants
wait
to
to
do
that.
it. But, after you've done it for a while and you start to reap the benefits of it, and like, well, if I go do this and it sucks really bad for an hour or two, then I'm going to get to reap the benefits that I want. And then eventually, it's not so bad. And eventually, you start to look forward to going because you're going to enjoy what comes after. And eventually, you end up enjoying the sucky part. And I'm the same way. Like, I hated drawing hands. And my mom was like, just draw it. Like, she just started like sticking her hand out for me to draw as she would model it for me. And I hated it and they sucked. But the more I made myself do it, the better it got. And so I made a rule, like, if I don't like it, I'm sticking it in the book as much as I can. And if you ever see a character in the background of a book that's just randomly in the back of panels where they don't belong or something, or like they just keep showing up, it's probably because I hate drawing that character and they have a really crappy costume that I hate drawing. But I'm going to stick them everywhere because I'm going to get good at drawing that costume, even if it sucks to have to draw it.
Man, I like you were saying, I feel like that's a life thing, man. Just keep going, just keep doing it over and over. Repetition.
Put in the hard work.
They say
Don't
practice
excuses.
makes perfect. They say practice makes perfect with stuff. Well, you're not ever going to be perfect at anything, but you can get really damn good at it. The more you do it, the better you're going to get for sure. But man, like I was saying a little bit earlier, man, thank you so much for coming on. You've helped me. You've helped me learn so much in this interview. And I've had a hell of a good time talking to you. It's been awesome just chatting with you, man. Usually we end this show with gratefulness because I'm a super grateful guy. I'm very grateful for a whole numerous things, right? But to shorten it down, I'll say 3 things I'm grateful for, and I'll let my guests say 3 things they're grateful for, man. For me, it doesn't change that often. 1, my support system, my beautiful wife, my 2 wonderful kids, my family, my friends, anybody who supported me with pro wrestling, with acting, filmmaking, voice acting, whatever the hell I choose to do, this podcast. I'm so grateful to have them people in my life because without them, I probably wouldn't be doing a lot of the stuff I'd be doing. The second thing is you guys, the people that come on the show, man, because if I'm being honest, you don't have to come on here. I'm just some dude that likes talking to people, man. So it means the world to me whenever I get to talk to a pro wrestler, a comic book artist, a comic book maker like yourself, a freaking uh, MMA fighters. I don't know, man, musicians, whoever. I am so grateful for you guys because I mean, without you, I'd just be some random dude talking on this thing by himself, and it would not be. It'd be like voice notes. What the hell is that? You know. So I'm really grateful for you stopping by and all the other guests that I've been able to have on the show. Thank you so much for that. The third thing is kind of a twofer. Uh, yeah, I'm very thankful to have God in my life, and I'm very thankful to have my health to be able to do the things that I'm doing, whether it's wrestling, whether it's going to work, or whether it's just getting up for the day and having clarity of mind. I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful to have God in my life because in the Bible it says, with him everything is possible and without him nothing is possible. And I believe that to be true myself. So, Mr.
Absolutely.
Fish, what are three things that you are grateful for in this moment?
My first is always going to be my faith in God, because I couldn't have made it through all the stuff I've been through if it wasn't for that. I wouldn't have survived finding out I had an incurable neurological disease that was never going to go away. I couldn't have survived being blind in a wheelchair for 15 years, unable to feed myself most of the time. I couldn't have survived all that stuff if it wasn't for my faith. I couldn't have come out of it laughing and happy and joyous if it wasn't for my faith. I couldn't have survived divorce and hardship and all the things that have, on in my life. And I couldn't be so grateful for the things I have now if it wasn't for my faith. And it makes everything better and easier. And I know God's going to see me through it no matter how dark it seems in the moment. Like, we just went to see my grandbabies. They were hurling all over the place. I still got to be grateful that I got to hang out with my grandbabies for the weekend, and they were awful snuggly because they were sick. It was a good time. I am super grateful for my amazing, kind, loving, beautiful, thoughtful wife whose belief in me and, strength makes it able for me to keep doing this as my career. And, if she wasn't so kind and thoughtful and supportive, she might gripe at me to do something that makes more money. But, I pay the mortgage and I keep the lights on, and, that's good. Uh, and I'm so grateful that I get to make my living doing the thing that I love most and the thing that I'm best at. Like, just because you like something doesn't necessarily mean you're any good at it. But to do the thing I love most, the thing that I happen to be best at, and the thing that I've wanted to do my entire life since I was a kid, that's how I get to make my living is still jaw dropping. And that now I get to make most of my living each year doing my own stories and selling my own books. That's like, getting your childhood wish come true and winning the lottery. And it's amazing. Though it would be nothing if it wasn't for my wife, and all of that would be pointless if it wasn't for my faith. So those are my three.
Thank you, man. Thank you for coming on, man. Hey, where can people find you, and what's some things you want to talk about before you get off of here?
I keep everything under Mr. Fish Comics wherever you go, whatever social media you're on. Mr. Fish Comics will get you there. YouTube, uh, TikTok, all of the places. Go Mr. Fish is my other website. That's my quick link. That will take you to whatever I'm working on right now. Like right now, it'll take you to the Alice Lost in Wonderland page. And as soon as we get the next Kickstarter up, it'll take you there, or it'll take you to my link tree. It'll always take you wherever you can get whatever I'm doing right now. But go Mr. Fish and Mr. Fish Comics, MrFishComics.com. That's where I'm at for everything. And absolutely check out the Patreon. There's lots of cool free stuff up there. I offer lots of cool things to help people learn to make comics and stuff. There's lots of cool videos on there about how to make comics. And you can subscribe for as little as $3 just to watch the videos and stuff and the live streams when I go live and ask questions and, yell out ideas for characters that might end up in books like Green Zone. And like I literally rolled up a random character on the show one day with my fans that were following along. We created a new character, and that became the supervillain that rules the world in the Mighty Caw the Cro-Magnon, and he's in issue 2 and 3 because we made him up on the show, and $3 ain't a bad price to get to take part in that. So check it out. You can subscribe and get a real comics sent to your door every month for $10. It's a heck of a deal, and usually Patreon exclusive covers too. So not for nothing.
Right on, man. Well, thank you so much once again for coming on, man. I really appreciate it and had a freaking awesome time with you.
It was fun, man. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Come join the fun.